Perfect. Great. Yeah. So my name's Preston Witt. I am the anti-corruption advisor for the Targeting Natural Resource Corruption Project, which is based out of WWF US. I see a lot of familiar names. So a lot of you probably are already familiar with TNRC, but basically our goal is to generate knowledge about how to incorporate anti-corruption into conservation in order to strengthen conservation projects. And especially this year, really focus on working with practitioners and champions to incorporate that knowledge into actual practice. So there are 6 sort of topics that we focus on in terms of our knowledge building. Law enforcement and criminal justice, which we'll talk about today, open governance, social norms and behavior change, which we will also talk about today, supply chains, illicit financial flows, and communities and inclusion. So if you go to our website, which we'll drop some links in later on, this is how you'll kind of see our knowledge hub organized. And so, of course, the topic of this webinar today is to talk about some specific results chains. And those that we'll present today are the law enforcement and criminal justice example results chain, which also includes illicit financial flows, which I'll explain later on, as well as the social norms and behavior change results chains. Later on, we'll be finalizing the results chain for open governance and one for traceability in supply chains. And then last year, we produced 3 as part of a piece on sustainable livelihoods within the communities and inclusion topic area. And I think, if I remember correctly, we might have had a webinar with CMP about that product as well. And as I mentioned, in addition to generating knowledge, we want to work with practitioners to incorporate that knowledge.
It's all upside.
Could I ask anyone who has joined if they could please mute? I think there may be some background.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so I just wanted to mention this as one of the main areas, or sort of the country-based work that TNRC has. And you can see a variety of different colors, a variety of different types of country-based work. There's more information at the website if you want to explore that, but just to give you sort of a flavor of the types of things that we've done. So we worked closely with WWF Peru to develop a methodology for doing a corruption risk assessment along the fisheries supply chains. They worked with Ecuador, WWF Ecuador, to incorporate that into some activities they have. Mexico, which is not colored here, is replicating that methodology, and using these examples and several other country office activities. We very soon will be publishing a guide to how, as part of your situation analysis, you can incorporate some anti-corruption perspectives and how that can strengthen your work, with some links and concrete examples to like the methodologies that these teams used. So I just wanted to mention that it's not the topic of today's conversation, but as sort of the really practical outputs that the TNRC is producing. And that all being said, we are in about the last year of TNRC, so it's was the five-ish year project funded by USAID, if I didn't mention that at the beginning. And in this last year, especially towards that goal of changing practice, these are kind of our 4 priorities. And these results chains are really a great example of these first 2 priorities. So making sure that the WWF and all of our partner organizations, the extended WWF family, USAID, a lot of your organizations have the materials and guidance and tools that they need to really embed anti-corruption into their work. So that's the sort of the tool side. And then also, as programs are being developed, as strategies are being developed, reinforcing again that need to incorporate anti-corruption and providing resources so that their organizations can do so. So before we move to the results chains, I know that was, shall we say, quite a mouthful, which I say just because I wanted to use this picture. So if there are any questions about TNRC, I see several other TNRC colleagues on the call as well. We can address those and then dive into the actual results chains. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen just so I can see. Okay, well, I don't see any, but hopefully the next portion of this will generate some comments, because basically what I'm going to do now is show you first what we did, what CMP resources we drew upon, and how we supplemented them, and then after that, go into the specifics of the two results chains that we produced. This will also be quite a mouthful, and so I will drop a link in at the end for a way for us to stay connected. So don't feel like you have to give all of your feedback today, but our goal here with presenting this really is to get your feedback. Of course, we want to share because we think it's useful. We want to share what we've done, but we also really want to take advantage of this space and all of your expertise to make any tweaks. So these aren't finalized yet. They aren't published yet. So anything about how to make these more useful, how to clarify any of the content, all of that, we would really appreciate hearing. So like I said, I'm going to give a quick overview of what we actually did. I'll start with social norms and behavior change, and then the law enforcement. Before I do the deep dive, it would be, and while I'm sort of explaining what we did, it would be super helpful if people just throw in the chat which of those they kind of is more relevant to them, just so I, between the two, can pick to start with. We're going to cover both of them, but just in terms of making sure we have plenty of time for discussion, I want to start with the one that's most relevant to the group. So while I'm talking, please just go ahead and do that. If you don't do that, then I'll just pick one myself. I'm going to have to move some things around so I can see what I'm doing here. So how we got started, and we've used this before as well. So as I'm sure most of you are familiar with, a lot of you have probably contributed to it, the Conservation Action Measures Library, CAML, has a lot of excellent starting point generic results chains like this one. And so these are so useful for, we found them to be so useful for just helping practitioners not start from zero. And so as we are encouraging practitioners who are doing a lot of these activities to incorporate anti-corruption, what we wanted to do is create some anti-corruption specific versions of these generic results chains to make it easier for practitioners to see how these things all fit together, to incorporate them into project proposals, project design, that sort of thing. So for social norms and behavior change, we started with the generic results chain for an outreach or communications conservation activity. Essentially, efforts to identify behaviors that you want to change. In our case, being sort of illicit or corrupt behaviors, and then going through a process to communicate and change those behaviors in your target audience. So we took this results chain, which you see here, which we haven't, this is directly from Camel, we haven't touched it yet. And then we produced this version, slightly simplified and supplemented with the information that you see in red. As I said, I'll go into the actual content in just a moment. But for each of the intermediate results with red text, we have added in additional content from the TNRC Knowledge Hub and other external resources. We have knowledge syntheses for each of those topic areas I mentioned. So a lot of this text is drawn from those. And as you can see, it has hyperlinks to specific pieces of guidance and additional information. So similarly, for law enforcement, we took the generic results chain for a law enforcement activity for illegal wildlife trade. This is the example from Camel. And again, we simplified it a little bit, but mostly just supplemented it with some anti-corruption specifics, either anti-corruption specific new boxes, new intermediate results, new contextual factors, or taking the existing intermediate results and just adding in a little bit to make them more anti-corruption relevant. We also, because you'll remember if you saw one of our topic areas is illicit financial flows, we also incorporated that one into law enforcement. And when I dive in, I'll mention a few of the IFF specific boxes. Great. I guess any overall questions about what we did before I go into the actual content? I'm going to check the chat and see if people have expressed any preference.
Preston, thank you for presenting so far. I just have a question. How is it when you work with people with these pre-designed theories of change? Is there also a danger that you should look out for, that people are just like, oh, it's already there, we don't have to think about it? Or does it, like, is there anything we should look out for, or is there only benefits from working this way, in your experience?
There's certainly the danger of just copying and pasting. I will say the level of information we've provided would make that difficult, or are pretty obviously insufficient. And like I said, this is most of this is very similar, drawn directly from Camel, which in itself, although it has some much more granular examples for a lot of these, I think does a really good job of explaining that this is a starting point. This is so that practitioners don't have to start from zero, but that this is just to inform their own sort of activity design. And so it's actually, though, still a very good point. And in when we do post these on the Knowledge Hub, linking, of course, to where they live in Marathi share. That's a really great point. I'm just going to write that down. That's a really great point to make sure that we emphasize that these are informative, not things that should just be copied, pasted in with the country name, and then submitted as a project.
I mean, if you used it as a project and it worked under certain circumstances, you could maybe say under which circumstances this worked or something like that, because, but with some of the generic ones, I'm just not sure if they have actually been tested already in actual projects, or, where we have a theory and then we need to go back and see, did it really pan out like that? Or do we actually need to adapt things? That's what I mean. Thank you.
Okay, I think people expressed a little bit more interest in social norms and behavior change, so I'll flip over to that one. Like I said, I'm going to go through both of them, but we'll start with social norms and behavior change. Just move things around. Great. So specifically looking at social norms and behavior change for anti-corruption, this is, and we've added in some examples here of the kinds of target audiences and undesired behaviors that one might target with an activity here. So, and most of these are drawn from from examples from our research and from our collaborations in countries. So there may be frontline officials like rangers who are collaborating with poachers for various reasons. I'll talk about that in a second. Artisanal fishers who may be paying bribes, who may have to pay bribes or view that they have to pay bribes. Timber inspection staff accepting bribes, etc. So as with any great conservation activity, the first step is always just sort of understanding and analyzing what the target audience, what the behaviors are. As you see here, we've added in some links to the TNRC resources around situation analysis with a specific view towards corruption risks and anti-corruption approaches. One of the reasons why these result chains aren't quite finished yet is because we are still finishing several really key resources, including, as I mentioned, that guide derived from all of our collaborations with offices about how to analyze as part of your situation analysis the sort of context of corruption in the sector and country in which you're working. So once you've sort of identified the audience and the illicit behavior, there are sort of two tracks here. So you do want to start focusing and developing the individual message that you will be targeting at those individuals. And I should say, our colleague, a lot of the text here comes from our colleague Gail with Traffic, Gail Burgess, and the knowledge synthesis that she produced for us. So this content is specific for how you would approach an anti-corruption behavior change intervention. But at the same time, it's important, and this is something that I did want to highlight here, it's important to understand what is driving the current behaviors and where that might present barriers for undertaking the desired behavior. So this is kind of especially important for anti-corruption behavior change because in a lot of contexts, either the thing that we as external actors consider as corruption may not be seen as such by the folks whose behavior we want to change, or in certain contexts, corruption or corrupt practices can kind of themselves become the expectation, in which, and in those cases, it becomes a lot harder to sort of point at something as corruption and get people to change their behavior. So this is the sort of mental, the sort of perception of, well, if everyone is corrupt, why should I behave ethically, especially if there's a certain cost, which especially in corruption or other fields involving illicit activity, there is a cost, because if you're a frontline official and your bosses are corrupt, they have quite a large interest in making sure that you're also involved in the illicit activities, so that you can't, so you're less likely to report them, and so that they have so-called dirt on you. So important to make sure that those additional contextual factors, those social norms, the expectations about how others will behave and how they'll respond to your behavior are also understood. And as you can see, I'm not going into full detail for those for whom this is most relevant. Like I said, we'll be publishing it quite soon. But another point that I did want to highlight, because it's so important to anti-corruption work, is sort of the fallacy of kind of thinking that all you need to do is identify corruption and point it out for folks. So really important as you're designing the message and targeting people that that you don't reinforce some of those norms that I mentioned before. So a lot of empirical research has shown that just telling people that others are corrupt as an effort to try and motivate them to take some action, like engage in some sort of accountability measure, isn't really going to work. There's a risk that you just further reinforce that belief that everyone's corrupt, so why should I care? And you're not, in most cases, you're not really providing any new information, because either people don't understand that behavior is corruption, or they don't expect it.
Todavía no oigo, ¿eh? Se oigo lo vuestro.
I think there may be some background noise. If everyone could please,
I muted them. Sorry, Jorge. Let us know if you need to unmute. So yeah, you're not giving them any new information. They either don't see it as corruption, or they already know that everyone's corrupt. So you're not really motivating them. Instead, good approaches, and as highlighted here and linked here, are to sort of appeal to people's professional identity, their community identity, their pride in that identity, working with a more targeted audience than sort of a generic widespread message, so that you can really leverage that identity. Those are all much more likely to be effective. And then again, thanks to Gail and her team, there are some additional sort of common principles around communicating for behavior change that are important to build into any behavior change activity, including anti-corruption. Great, so that's social norms and behavior change. I'm going to stop again in case there are any specific questions about SNBC. If you have feedback around kind of how we've done these, you can offer it now, or you can offer it sort of after you see law enforcement. Maybe we fixed it in law enforcement, although it's very similar to how we've done this one. I see someone, John's raised a hand. Go ahead.
Thanks, Preston, and thanks for the presentation. You know that I'm a big supporter of you guys doing this and providing these results change for us, because I really think it's going to help the conservation community be able to digest and use your work. I'm thinking out loud, but I think there might be an issue. Again, I am really thinking out loud. But my thought is that let's pretend that in this case, the threat is poaching, perhaps. I'm thinking that in order to reduce poaching that is confounded by corruption, that there's probably other strategies that you're going to use. And I think it would be helpful if you showed that there were other strategies that you're actually, because I think that's generally going to be the case, that it's not just corruption that's facilitating a threat, and it's not going to be the only solution. So if you were able to get rid of corruption, you'd still be needing to undertake these other strategies. So again, pretending that the threat is poaching, you're going to be doing other things and showing how your efforts to reduce corruption is going to facilitate the effective implementation of those other strategies, I think would be important in these results chains in general. So that's just a thought going forward. Yeah, just to be able to show some other generic strategies or two, and how the fact that you're trying to address the corruption is going to help you implement those other strategies. I think that would be important. So in other words, trying to tease apart in your results chains the work that you're doing to address corruption versus the other strategies that are needed. Over.
Thanks, and we've definitely sort of beaten our heads against that wall a bit. Yeah, you're highlighting a definite weakness with the approach that we've taken. I will say, I guess, two things. So, one, we were able to take that approach a bit more with the law enforcement one. I guess they're not two things; they're kind of the same thing. Because so this one is specifically if you want to take a social norms behavior change approach to anti-corruption. So yes, that is limited, but in the same way that that all of these generic results chains can, when they're about very specific approaches like social norms behavior change, they are kind of limited in the assumption. Again, something that we can also be sure that we build into the text when we publish these is that the assumption that this would be part of a larger initiative. And so yeah, when we go into law enforcement, you'll see there's a lot more. Essentially, there are a lot more of these yellow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hexagons, indicating that the anti-corruption activities that you're building in are in service to and connected to a variety of other approaches, some of which aren't directly related to anti-corruption. So yeah, there was a bit of a challenge with the topic areas and kind of apples and oranges in terms of some of them are about broad areas of conservation that have certain corruption risks and things you need to build in order to mitigate those risks. And then like for this one, what we kept getting asked for is like, yes, you're talking about the importance of engaging with social norms and behavior change in order to change corrupt behaviors. How do we actually do that? So yeah, that's definitely heard. And maybe I hope that in the law enforcement one, some of that concern will get resolved. Alistair.
Hi, Preston. Thanks. My question is slightly different, and I don't know if this is the right place to raise it. It's a little more like, so it's sort of got 3 examples where we're looking at corruption in different sites, like one where we've done sort of 60 interviews and really understood it in depth. And it's sort of thinking about the 6 approaches that you had at the beginning, and that's why I don't know if this is the right place to raise the issue. And what we're seeing is much more associated with structural weaknesses. And by that, I mean like how people are getting like things to do with household debt, things to do with trauma, things to do with power relations related sometimes to racial issues, and the use of violence. And so first of all, my big picture question, this is why I don't, is those don't seem to be addressed in any of the 6 approaches you have up front. And then second, kind of linking that into social norms and behavior change, like to address that, some of the things that have come out from sort of co-developing approaches with people have been this sort of focus in on, so A is kind of addressing some of those drivers directly, so taking that seriously and working out how you can address that household, like indebtedness, and the risk associated with indebtedness actually gets complicated because the organized criminals often run the loan sharks. So that gets them closer to the relationship they want with the field rangers. But the other part of that is linking to the social norms, is that you can put other structural conditions in place. For example, your selection mechanisms, that you focus on people with certain values and qualities you want, and there are ways to test for that we're learning now that you can codify. Looking at leadership and how you manage and lead people. So you then are narrowing the group of people that you're wanting to work with on social norms and behavior change by targeting people that you want, and targeting values-based leadership approaches that you want, targeting structural organizational systems that emphasize those qualities and behaviors and whatever that you want as well. And I'm just not seeing that structural problem and then structural solution approach. But maybe I'm missing it. I don't know if this was the right place to raise it.
No, I mean, I don't know if this is the right place to raise it either, but I'm glad that you did. Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So definitely that sort of need to understand just a specific term in the anti-corruption literature that's escaping me right now. Functionality, understanding what function the quote unquote corruption is serving. In many cases, that function is the corruption is baked into the types of economic activities that are around here, thanks to sort of elites and powerful folks that aren't even part of this community. I don't have a choice, right? And so that came up in one of our pilots looking at the artisanal fishers having to pay bribes. The structure was they would have to spend half of the fishing day going way over here in the gas to get there in order to get the permit that they were required to get, or they could before they could fish, or they could just fish, come into the dock, pay a bribe, like, oh yeah, we didn't get the permit, but here you go. And it's actually just cheaper to do that. Of course, that introduces a lot of other issues and vulnerabilities, and then and sort of, well, if you're not following those laws, a bit of a snowball of, well, why should we follow these other laws? So not saying it's certainly not a good equilibrium to be in. And the team there did through technology figure out a way to close a lot of those vulnerabilities by solving that sort of real life challenge, economic challenge that those fishers faced. Two other points I would add, or I guess to finish that point. So in the anti-corruption basics on the website, which didn't appear as one of the 6 thematic areas, it's sort of cross-cutting. That's where a lot of the stuff like that does appear. And our colleagues, we work closely with Aled Williams at U4, and I know that he's one of the sort of thought leaders around that perspective as well. So a lot of that sort of theoretical explanation lives there, with specific links to like examples in practice, like the pilot that I mentioned. And then the other point that I would make is that I didn't go into detail, and it's not for every box, and I'll double check to make sure that all of the content that's in the knowledge synthesis is here. But that was something that that from Gail's leadership we did make sure was in the knowledge synthesis. So I think some of the stuff I think might be here around sort of taking an approach to sort of codes of conduct, or sort of integrity agreements in terms of targeting who you want to work with in terms of like rangers or someone like that. So yeah, that all that information is in the knowledge synthesis, and like I said, I'll go back and make sure that it is cited here. Okay, not seeing any other questions, although I can't see the chat here. And I've forgotten about the translators, so apologies if I've been speaking too quickly. So let's jump over to the law enforcement and illicit financial flows results chain. So this one, like I said, we were able to maintain a lot more of the underlying structure of the conservation activity, which was improving the way that law enforcement handles wildlife crime. So enhancing their investigative capacity, actually arresting and prosecuting traffickers, recovering assets, protecting the legal system, and a lot of the reinforcing measures, many of which aren't sort of, they're all in red because we've incorporated anti-corruption stuff in there, but all of which aren't necessarily anti-corruption. So I guess they don't actually appear as hexagons, which is something we can reconsider here. But so this is where, for example, taking approaches that involve improving accountability and transparency. There will, once everything's published, be a link here to that open governance results chain and knowledge synthesis, showing how sort of that's an important approach to incorporate as well. The social norms and behavior change stuff that we were just talking about, again, would appear here, as well as some of the private sector approaches, although this is a bit more around, as the text that we've added here is a bit more around illicit financial flows. But just starting from the beginning, again, the importance of doing political economy analysis or some other situation analysis that can identify the corruption risks in law enforcement, not only doing that, but making sure that your approach to understanding what weaknesses exist in the law enforcement system can capture where corruption may be taking place. So understanding those weaknesses, you would then move into the activities to try and build that capacity. Some of those here that are in black are directly from CAMEL. And then the ones that we've added in red are from TNRC resources, building in skills for investigators to leverage, in this case, illicit financial flow, follow the money approaches to illicit financial flows, so that you can generate that sort of financial evidence that is very useful for making sure that you're not just arresting sort of low-level frontline people, but you're actually going after the financiers, the sort of big wigs behind the scenes. A large portion of TNRC's work that we're really proud of is around ensuring integrity in courts and the justice system. And here, for this one, about making sure that good evidence is available for the arrest and prosecution and process of justice. We've linked to a lot of the work that Traffic has done as part of TNRC, that the Basel Institute on Governance has done. We're just about to release a couple of very practical how-to guides to one about assessing corruption risks in the law enforcement sector, and one on, it's kind of the last sentence here in this box, around strengthening internal controls. So making sure, I'm overly simplifying this, but making sure that evidence, once you have it, doesn't disappear, doesn't get undermined, that sort of some of the basic controls to make sure that that evidence can be used in court exist. So once you've enhanced that capacity, you actually want to have the arrests, the prosecutions, the legal process. So here, of course, the importance of whistleblower mechanisms, and we've linked to some specifics around anti-corruption whistleblower mechanisms. Again, citing some of the work Basel's done for us, seizing the profits of crime. So once you followed the money, trying to recover it so that you can compensate victims, you can use that funding to reforest or to strengthen the protected area, but also very importantly, making sure that you've taken away that money from those who might reinvest it in further wildlife crime. Again, I mentioned the great work on monitoring court cases, monitoring their progress through the system, strengthening internal controls and other institutions of justice and law enforcement. And yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is where we put a lot of those other strategies that might appear. And I am going to kind of rethink about the logic of having them all right here. That might not make as much sense for the sort of results chain, but this is where the open governance stuff appears, social norms and behavior change. We've done a lot in our communities and inclusion topic area around the importance of taking a human rights-based approach. A really great example around more sort of soft power approaches. So a more kind of making sure that you've considered whether or not the sort of hard enforcement approach is really the right one in a certain context. As I said, private sector approaches to engaging with banks. We have a big work stream on that as a really innovative area of potential partnership for environmental organizations who may identify information that would be very useful to banks and other institutions that have to do that have to keep track of who's doing business with them due to legal requirements, and they can be real allies to interrupting a lot of these networks. Yeah, and then the policies and regulations that you need to have in place in order to be able to generate evidence, to be able to strengthen the justice system, that sort of thing. Yeah, so as I said, not going through every detail. That is the law enforcement and illicit financial flows one. I'm seeing John raising his hand. Yeah, happy to move to questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Preston. So if I can summarize, some of the red boxes are how to tune, in this example, law enforcement with anti-corruption measures. And then your yellow rectangle are more specific anti-corruption approaches that would also help with enabling conditions. And I think they are probably, well, those blue boxes within the yellow box, they're a mix of, in terms of phrasing, some of it's about results, some of it's like private sector approaches is a strategy. So I think it would be good, to have them be consistent, and you could probably have them all consistently as results. And then I suggest having a yellow hexagon that said something like corruption reduction approaches feeding into that yellow hexagon, and that would probably solve your issue. And I think my comment on the previous one, on the behavior change one, I think it still stands, because I don't think that corruption is the threat. I think that there are other threats, and corruption is making those, harder to solve. And so I think that having another yellow hexagon in the previous behavior change results chain would be good to show that how all of this corruption reduction work is going to help you with your other strategy. Over. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Alistair. Yeah, thanks for raising your hand. People don't seem to be stumbling over each other to speak, so yeah, go ahead.
No, no worries. A slightly different point. We've recently done a 2-year study on convergence of wildlife crime and other illicit flows in Southern and East Africa. And unfortunately, it was due out on Monday, but it'll come out next Monday, I think. And one of the things that was very clear from that is that with trafficking of, so wildlife trafficking, whatever it is, corrupt facilitators at key hubs play a very, very important role. And that if you prioritize and target the corrupt facilitators, you can disrupt the flows. And so I just wonder, in that top box on the left there, precise information used to identify large-scale traffickers. So I know of 2 examples, for example, like Tanzania and Mozambique, where law enforcement authorities can identify the traffickers, but they can't touch them because of political support. And I know you've got that in there as politically thinking about the political economy of the situation. But I wonder if adding in there traffickers and corrupt facilitators, because they can often go after the corrupt facilitators, which then disrupts the wildlife trafficking flow, even though the wildlife traffickers you can't touch. So it's just a thought to, given that we're talking about corruption, to talk about the role of corrupt facilitators in as a law enforcement target to improve your law enforcement outcome, basically.
That's a great suggestion, and definitely one that we can add. When that study comes out, where should I look for it?
Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. So it'll be, and it's INL funded. So I don't know if INL will have it up quickly, but the GI will have it up hopefully next Monday.
Awesome. Yeah, if there are any other questions or comments,
I just, sorry, hi, I have a general question. I don't know if this is even a question just for this, but so what I really love in this Merari share result chain is that you can have like extra information, like the way you click on the boxes to have more, and then you have like more information and more links to the, I wonder specifically with this kind of work, which can be dangerous to, I mean, in terms of safety, is there something you're thinking about, like linking to here, like not a disclaimer, but something that, you know, don't take this lightly, you know, the situation, because I just know from colleagues who work on sturgeons, for example, sometimes if you go into a market and you ask the wrong questions, you could have somebody pull a gun on you pretty quickly. And so I just wondered if, but maybe the result chain is not the right place for this. I just wondered if there was an option like to add a box and then, you know, say like these are the things you have to consider before you even. Yeah, I mean, hopefully professional organizations would know all that, but sometimes I feel like we are in this, yeah, we can do it, we will wing it kind of approach. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great point. All the linked materials do in some cases go out of their way to really acknowledge and highlight those risks, the need to sort of think through that in advance. But it's a great point that it would probably be worth adding here at the beginning as part of assessing and understanding, assessing what those risks might be to undertaking the rest of these activities, connecting with that point Alistair was making, that well, your point being about sort of the safety of the project folks, but then that is very closely connected to considering who your targets are and who you're going after, and just being intentional about and strategic about who you're targeting. Yeah, those are great points.
And to John's point about showing that this is not the only thing we have to do, I wonder if you're linking it. So I've only used the desktop Merari, and there you could link a result chain to a situational analysis. I'm sure you can do it here too. And I just wonder if maybe the conceptual model would be a place where you show that this is one of the a supporting strategy to achieve a certain thing because otherwise probably this would get really big and busy. And I mean, I don't mind big, busy theories of changes, but some people do. So I think it could be another option for you to explore, to somehow clearly link to the conceptual model, and there make it so clear that, you know, this is tackling a driver or an indirect factor or a factor, but, you know, there's other threats and other strategies to work on. That could be a way.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. Thank you. All right. Let's stop sharing for a second. Oh, I can just place the share. Yeah, so just the last thing that that I wanted to mention. TNRC, along with Transparency International, and this won't be news to a lot of you, because I think I've seen some of you in those initial meetings. We do have this practitioners forum for countering environmental corruption. It's really intended to be a forum for practitioners. So I wanted to include that, and I can drop the link there. That would be a really great space to join. There are some working groups already, but especially if people are interested in leading specific working groups, there's opportunity for that. But I did want to mention it because it's also just a really, in addition to the Knowledge Hub, which is tnrcproject.org, it's going to be one of the channels through which we share out a lot of our practitioner-focused guidance and knowledge. So it would be great to join that space, to receive these updated results chains when they're published, and the other ones that I mentioned as well. That's all I have. So I think I can, happy to continue discussing if anyone has any questions or comments about TNRC, about anything. If Ryan, if you want to add or say anything, yeah, I've done my duty in not taking up the full hour.
Not at this particular moment. The one thing that I will mention is, like I put in the chat, if anyone is interested in also hosting any CMP webinars in the future, please don't hesitate to contact me. I've included my email in that message. And like I said, the message is just a great way to connect with, learn from, and teach and inform various different conservation practitioners. And thank you so much, Preston, for presenting today.
Happy to do it. Thanks everyone for your input as well. Oh, we have a hand raised.
Something, yeah.
Ciao. Thank you.
Might have been unintentional. James, did you have something?
No, that was actually. I liked what you said about when you tell everybody that corruption's widespread, then you normalize corruption, and people say, well, yeah, you're telling us something we already know, and you can actually reinforce it. And your alternative was to try to focus on people's identities. And I'm wondering what identities, I guess you also have to look at what identities people have that justify or reinforce corruption. And I was just curious about that. If that's something that you dug into at all.
Yeah, I'm going to direct you to that topic page on the Knowledge Hub. That's the social norms behavior change stuff is at the far edge of my expertise, for what it's worth. But just thinking back to conversations with Gail and working on that, on the content for that part of the hub. There was a really good study that Global Integrity did, and basically they were essentially leveraging coming into I forget which country it was, but coming into that context and understanding that what they were considering as corruption wasn't actually what the people there thought as corruption. And in fact, it was pretty much the only way for those leaders, formal and informal, to get resources for their community. So it's basically just sort of how things got done. And what they focused on is this sort of some of the like acknowledgement that that's not a great situation, which people understood. You know, they didn't necessarily consider it corruption, but they knew that the ideal situation wasn't sort of a backroom deal for their community to get something that another community with a less powerful leader couldn't get. And then building on that, taking this approach towards sort of positive recognition. And it was specifically around parks. And so they, working with the protected areas, they really generated this identity of like, we're an ethical protected area. Like we operate with integrity. We've met, you know, these 5 principles or whatever it was, but really pushing that pride in being well run, well managed, and not engaging in some of these other activities. Of course, that sort of relied on the ability to make sure that those areas could get resources without the quote unquote corruption, which is of course a part of it as well, and making sure that you're not just telling someone to do something different, but you're actually creating the opportunity for them to do something different. So that's one example that came to mind. There's much more useful information on that part of the Knowledge Hub.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Great.